Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. And while a lot of people are very excited about the fact that the Bersante C45, the first Italian heavy tank, comes out today inside the loot boxes, there's another prize inside them. It is the GSOR 1008. Now this vehicle hasn't really been talked about nearly as much as the Italian auto-reloading heavies, but as you're going to see in the tank review today, this turreted British tank destroyer is no slouch on the battlefield. So the first thing to mention about the GSOR is this is an absolute bizarre vehicle. It kind of has some of the capabilities of a medium, some of the capabilities of a tank destroyer, a lot like the Charioteer inside the British turreted tank destroyer tech tree. But the fact that this vehicle, unlike all of the other British tanks, except for the 87 as I found out if you're using the stock gun, has an autoloader. But unlike that gun on the 87, this one is actually very competitive. Accordingly, it's really hard to be able to choose what to compare this tank to, but I've chosen the Lorraine, the T77 and the T69, as it's kind of like a hybrid of all of those vehicles. So the first thing to mention about this vehicle is it has an abysmal DPM, a lot like the T77. However, that never really stopped me from dominating in that tank as long as you work around that really long reload time. And ladies and gents, boys and girls, if you thought the 40-second reload time of the T77 was long, think again. The GSOR 1008 has a 45-second reload time, and that's because it has the biggest magazine out of any of these vehicles. Just like the Lorraine 40T, it has a 4-round autoloader, but it delivers 320 damage rather than the 300 damage that the Lorraine has. Also, just like the T77 and the T69, this vehicle has a 2-second intra-clip reload, which is half a second better than Lorraine, and thus is able to burst out 1,280 damage within 6 seconds of the first shot. Now, if we're thinking about burst damage, that's not as quite as good as the T77, which is capable of doing 1,080 in 4 seconds, but yeah, it makes the vehicles like the T69 wince, and the fact that you have higher alpha damage and you unload faster really makes the Lorraine 40T look a bit more of a flappy damage dealer. Now the interesting thing about this vehicle is that it has very low penetration for a tier 8 tank destroyer at 226. This is less than the Lorraine, this is less than the T77, and it's only better than a vehicle like the T69, which I think has definitely seen better days, as pretty much every other vehicle in the game has power crept it. However, the GSOR has an ace up its sleeve, and that is APDS rounds, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to be calling APCR rounds. And these boys, well, they're pretty much pay to win in World of Tanks at its finest. Now your penetration goes up to 321 and your shell velocity ramps up to 1,411, making this tank truly monstrous compared to the Lorraine, which for example has 263 millimeters of penetration and a 1,250 meters a second shell velocity, and the T77, which had really good heat pen at 299 but abysmal shell velocity at 850. And we won't even look at the T69's paltry 250 millimeters of premium penetration. This means that the GSOR goes from being one of the lowest penetration tank destroyers at tier 8 with its standard rounds to one of the highest with its premium rounds, making this, if you want to be absolutely filthy in this tank, one of the most expensive tanks to play, and is frankly quite pay to win. When you compound this with that incredibly long reload time and the abysmal DPM that this vehicle has, trust me, bouncing standard rounds can be incredibly painful in this tank, and you kind of wish that you just loaded gold in the first place. But at 4,800 credits a shot for those APCR rounds, yeah, that's a hefty price tag. Before we move on to the gun handling of this vehicle, a passing mention should be made to the fact that it carries 40 rounds of ammunition. Doesn't really feel like a lot, and accordingly, I probably wouldn't use high explosive rounds in this vehicle. I personally am going to take half AP and half APCR because that gold pen is almost mandatory against a lot of tier 9 and tier 10 tanks. So now on to the gun handling, and this is where it's actually really good news for this vehicle. 2.3 seconds aim time, 0.34 accuracy, which is best in class here, although it has worst in class dispersion when moving, but best in class dispersion when turning the turret. It also has better dispersion after firing, which is an important mechanic to take into account of when we are talking about vehicles with very low intra-clip reloads, like the GSOR's 2 seconds. So what this means is that the GSOR 1008 is not going to be so good for moving and shooting accurately, but if you're sitting still, its turret reverse is fantastic. And the fact that this tank's bloom after firing is 3.5 compared to the T77's 4.5 means that you're going to be delivering magazines way more accurately, or at least make up for the fact that this thing can't use vertical stabilizers, as it is a tank destroyer, unlike the T-77, which if you double stack on the Lorraine and you double stack on the T-77, kind of evens this playing field. But hey, it basically means you get a free extra piece of equipment for the GSOR 1008. Watch out if your opponents get above you in the GSOR, however, as it only has 10 degrees of elevation. And in fact, this vehicle actually has more depression at 11 degrees, and that makes this tank oh so darn wonderful on a ridge line. If you thought 10 was good on a vehicle like the Bisonte, which I recently reviewed, just look at all of that gun depression over the front. The vehicle can pretty much shoot down from the vast majority of ridge lines in the game. And even the gun depression over the back of this tank is 8 degrees, which means that you don't have to worry about vehicles getting up behind you sneakily. Next up, what is the mobility of the GSOR? Well, it goes at 60 forwards, just as good as the Lorraine, 17 backwards. Not bad for a tank destroyer. Not nearly as good as the Lorraine and the T-69, however, but it does trump the T-77's awful 12. On the other hand, this vehicle, while it doesn't really look like it's going to weigh that much, it weighs 43.5 tons. Heavier than the Lorraine, and not too much less than the T-77. And when you factor in that this vehicle has a weak engine power of 640, this means that the power to weight ratio of the vehicle is less than 15. And while that is not the worst power to weight ratio you're ever going to have, it definitely hampers the vehicle getting up to its top speed unless you're able to harness the momentum on a slope, and hopefully you've got off-road driving and clutch braking on the driver of your vehicle. Yeah, you're really not going to want to lose too much of that momentum, and don't expect to be able to whiz away quickly if you're along the flat or even going up slope. This is compounded by the fact that the vehicle has the worst turret traverse significantly in this comparison, and also the worst track traverse with worse ground resistances than the Lorraine. However, they are a bit better than the T-77 and the T-69, but those vehicles still have better traverse speeds considering their enhanced engine power. All right, next up, durability. How good is the GSOR? Well, it's got 100mm of frontal armor, 50.8 millimeters of side armor. That's very important. That 0.8 means that you can side scrape against a BL-10, aka a 152 millimeter main armament, but don't side scrape against a T-30, as they're going to be using a 155 millimeter gun, and you will not be ricocheting that, as it will overmatch your vehicle. And on the turret armor, it's 152 and 50 on the side. This looks great for this tank. However, then again, when I look at the T-69 and the fact that the T-69 has better armor than this, supposedly, the T-69 doesn't really feel too good either. Okay, so let's set up the GSOR as if you were straight on against your opponent and you were firing at them with the same gun that this has with 226 millimeters of pen. Well, we can see that there are some auto ricochet angles across the upper part of the hull and also around the neck of this tank, but the whole of the hull, oh yeah, you only need 100 to 160 millimeters to be able to pen. The turret as well, about 180, 160 to be able to pen. You're going to be able to use that against tier 6 tanks and some tier 7 tanks, but pretty much every single tier 8 unless it's undergunned, and every single tier 9 and tier 10 is going to go through this turret very well indeed. Alright, so what happens if you're using the gun depression of this tank? Well, not too much changes. Even when you are using all 11 degrees, the upper hull is still not very good, so don't expect to be ricocheting very often, if at all, in this vehicle. And your best bet to try and put pressure on your opponents is to kind of over-angle your hull like this. As do you see how the side of the tank is actually slanted outwards, meaning that this vehicle actually has very troll side armor, and you should try and bait your opponents into shooting it and hopefully wasting their shell on your tracks. And if you do see one of these on the battlefield, don't get baited into shooting that part of the GSOR. Shoot them in the hull, shoot them in the turret. You're going to be able to go through that very consistently. And if you get a high explosive round, well, feel free to jam it in the back of the tank. Now, as you would expect for a tank destroyer, you're going to have fairly poor hit points right at tier 8. Well, that's not exactly the case of the GSOR. It's got 1,200 hit points, the same as the recent Object 274A. This is enough quite often to weather the storm, to take a hit for an opponent, and then hopefully deliver that 1,286 second burst, which is what this tank is all about. Next up, the camo rating. Actually really good for this vehicle. Makes the T-77 look awful, as that's a heavy tank. And also, when stationary with a half decent crew, you can get up to 36% concealment on this tank and 23.45 when moving. And that's not brilliant on the move concealment, but keep in mind that my commander from my FV4005 is still only at 46%, so we could probably get that up to about 25%. And it's actually very decent when we compare it to the Scorpion G, another turreted tier 8 premium tank destroyer, which has sub 15% when moving when you have a full concealment crew. A passing mention should be made to the GSOR's view range, which is 370. It could be way worse than this, and to have the same kind of view range as a T77, 10 meters worse than the Lorraine, but way worse than the T69, means that you are going to be spotting your opponents at decent distances if you have the right equipment set up and the right crew skills. So how do I personally like to set this vehicle up? Well, currently I like to use a rotation device on this tank because remember, you can reduce the dispersion. And as this vehicle is an autoloader, it can't use a gun rammer. And so you actually have quite a lot of flexibility with the equipment that you would be using on this tank. If you don't have a bounty rotation mechanism, I would thoroughly recommend you use a regular rotation mechanism in your firepower slot to still at least get that 12.5% bonus. The next crucial bit of equipment to use on this tank will be vents, because you want to do everything that you can to be able to reduce the reload of this vehicle. And the fact that this is a tank destroyer means that you can't use vertical stabilizers, so you don't really have too many better options. I would also recommend to either use coated optics on this tank if you have a very good crew. If you don't, and you get one of these without having a really good British turreted tank destroyer crew, then I would probably recommend to put binoculars on this vehicle. However, it is an autoloader, it likes to keep moving and it wants to be fairly dynamic, unlike something like a Scorpion, for example. And so if you can get those coated optics on the tank and get the view range still up to about 460, even without using a premium consumable on this tank, that'll be very decent indeed. Honorable mentions should be made to probably using a turbocharger on this vehicle as well. However, I'd probably wait for there to be a bounty turbocharger before I consider to use that on this tank, as I personally consider the rotation device mandatory on this vehicle. The vents, at least in my opinion, are mandatory, and unless you want to drop the coated optics and not have particularly good view range, then I can't see how you can afford to put a turbo on this vehicle. All right, so what kind of a crew layout does the GSOR have if you're planning to use this to pump up your FV4005 crew training, for example? Well, one thing that's really nice about this is the radio operator is also the commander. Or shall I say that the commander is also the radio operator on this tank? That's exactly the same as the FV4005, and so you've hopefully got situational awareness, recon, sixth sense, brothers in arms on your FV4005, which will also help to ramp up the view range of this tank, and that is really one of my hot picks. If you don't already have a premium crew member, i.e. something with a 0 skill to allow you to accelerate your crew training, I would thoroughly recommend to put one on the FV4005 and use that inside the GSOR to get every advantage that you can on the tank. Apart from that, I'm going to be using a gunner from my charioteer, who I would probably consider to take safe stowage on this vehicle, as I was Amarak quite a few times while I was playing on this tank. And I'm going to be taking a driver as well from my FV4005, and the only real crew skills that I'm going to be missing on this tank will be preventative maintenance, with a priority on taking off-road driving and clutch braking to be able to maximize the vehicle's mobility. But I guess you're all fed up of me talking. Why don't I just show you how it performs on the battlefield? Let's take the first premium autoloading tank destroyer at tier 8 out to see what it is capable of. Alright then, so when I'm playing in the GSOR 1008, there's just so much that you can do in this tank. You can try and rush into position to try and be a medium tank, try and get on a ridgeline especially, and there's a nice big ridgeline that goes right through the middle of Glacier here. So I'm going to spot that Panther up on my right by using my coated optics, my crew skills, and also the vents that I have on this vehicle. And oh dear, stock T29. Oh, no. Well, at least the artillery put in the extra shot, so I'll be able to put one in the Tiger. Yes, ladies and gents, that is 1,345 damage as quickly as that. This vehicle is voracious, 11 degrees of gun depression, able to spot for itself, and if you set this thing up correctly with snapshot on your gunner, for example, and you've got yourself that rotation mechanism, the turret traverse on this vehicle feels absolutely outrageous. I wonder what Wargaming were really thinking was going to happen with tank destroyers using a rotation device. The whole point of tank destroyers was that they had kind of a better gun, but they kind of really lacked that dispersion value. It's bizarre to me that they've got this tank, which kind of has dispersion values like a higher tier medium tank, and with the rotation device, not quite as good as the new improved vents, the bounty vents. Sorry, not the bounty vents, the bounty vertical stabilizer that you could use on a medium tank. But getting 15% rotation dispersion is 75% as good as we were having on all of our old vertical stabilizers on our tanks. So this thing just has really good gun handling. Bang, bang, bang into the T-29. Artillery finishes him off. Kind of did me a favor because then I got to just unleash the extra shell on the Tiger. However, I kind of would have liked to also pick up that kill on that T-29. So one of my challenges in this vehicle was trying to stay active while I was reloading, because did you see how awful it was? Sure, it's not the worst thing in the world. You can kind of pretty much get it down to about 40 seconds from 45 seconds with the right kind of crew skills on this tank. But you do have to run away immediately afterwards. And you should also be planning about what you're going to do. You should also try and tell your team what you're going to do. What will make a GSOR player great is their ability to be able to read the map, to see the way that the situation is going to develop, and then be there before it's too late. So even though this vehicle doesn't have the best grunt in the engine, it's still enough for me to be able to make this flanking play. And right now I'm just hoping that the Progetto isn't going to get me. I'm thinking, should I turn my turret around there? And then I thought, no, I won't. But look, this is the elevation problem with this tank. There you go, I get to show it to you. That is how poor the elevation is on this vehicle. But luckily for me, the Progetto doesn't manage to see me. And at this kind of distance with my 25% concealment when I'm moving, yeah, it'd be hard pressed to. And oh dear, oops, I did it again. Gonna smash this Tiger 2 down below. 1, 2. That's such a quick burst damage. It really is. When I'm playing something like a Lorraine with 2.5 seconds, I think that is brutal enough. We actually also managed to bounce a shell there from the Tiger, who looks like he fired at our observation device and it bounced off our upper hull because we were using the full gun depression of the tank. And you'll see, I'm actually reloading. I think I was actually going AFK at this point and going and seeing what Tanya was up to, or at least just asking her a few questions, going, oh yeah, what are you watching on your computer? Because I was actually playing alongside her at that point. You do have a lot of time. You could probably Alt-Tab. You could probably send a message to your babushka or your mum, or you could just snuggle your dog a little bit. Look, don't go AFK inside World of Tanks. There's already enough idiots going AFK. But really, we're just going to be able to surprise CS52. I guess he doesn't really know what this vehicle is, and I guess he learned. He learned what this tank is. Good lord, that is burst damage, and it's where you want to have those 1,200 hit points. You take one shot, you put 4 in, or in that case 3, and shut them down. This vehicle is going to be the absolute bane of all tanks and everything else that have about 1,000 hit points. You can see what we were able to do with that gun depression against that Tiger, and if the enemy don't manage to catch you reloading, which is the true weakness of this vehicle, boy, your firepower is still astounding. The damage per minute is awful, but a lot like the Bisonte C45, which has better DPM in single shot mode, but definitely poor DPM if you go into the second or the third shell, this tank seems to do well, and it never held me back in the T77. You'll see that I very confidently reload immediately afterwards. I kind of possibly maybe regret that, thinking that the ISU 152 has got about 1,200 hit points and they might have taken some damage earlier. Maybe I shouldn't have reloaded. But honestly, in this tank, if you know you've got time, why not? The ISU isn't going to come around the corner. The artillery isn't magically going to be able to flank me. Why not take the time to be able to reload to make sure you're at maximum efficiency? And I think this ISU 152 is up here. I'm very worried about going around the corner. There he is. There he is. Luckily, I pulled back before I take the 750 damage. But yes, should have probably thought about the other things on the enemy team that aren't exactly going to be doing a 750 damage with high penetration. But yeah, they're still pretty proficient for shutting me down here. However, I managed to get the ISU 152 spotted. I stop him from being able to shoot the CS52 lease on the way in, and that's where this tank just feels so good. To have a turret means that you can actively press around a corner. To have a turret means you can work a ridgeline. It's not a tank destroyer by essence. It's a lot like a charioteer, but even the charioteer had very, very, very bad gun handling. This tank does not have bad gun handling, and when you combine that with the rotation device on this vehicle, your gun handling starts to feel more like a medium. And if you have enough crew skills on the tank, then you can definitely make up for the poor damage per minute that the vehicle has, and it truly starts to become absolutely monstrous. What are we going to do here? Oh, tree on my left! Clap him, set him on fire. Where's the other one? No! Okay, very fitting that artillery shuts us down in our first game in the GSOR. But in this 6.5 minute game, I'll take 4,000 damage and 3 kills. More gameplay. Alright, Muravanka, where am I going to go with a tank destroyer? Well, is this even really a tank destroyer at the end of the day? It's got a turret, it's got 1,250 hit points, and it's got about 200 millimeters of turret armor and hull armor. Is this a tank destroyer? I guess the only thing that differentiates this from a medium tank at this point would be the worst dispersion, but as I've constantly said throughout, this tank doesn't even really have band dispersion. It feels as if it's a medium tank inside the tank destroyer tech tree. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. In fact, it's actually, it is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Doesn't really make sense. It's almost like a wolf in wolf's clothing, because you kind of like think of tank destroyers as being the dangerous ones on the battlefield, right? It just has all of the flexibilities of being a sheep. No, this isn't going anywhere. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying. Hopefully somebody out there is actually understanding what QuickyBaby is saying. And just look at when I turn the turret to the left and the right there. I was just actually thinking to myself while I was doing that the dispersion values on this vehicle, I know I've said this like a million times, but I really have to hammer it home. And I think that it's one of the things that's actually going to make this vehicle end up being very, very good. All right, Mr. Revelarize. Okay, you fired one at the ridgeline. Okay, how about this? How about you take one? How about you take two? Oh, I've got a third view as well. Oh, well, how about a fourth? You want a fourth as well? Oh, brilliant. Wonderful. Good lord, sir. 1,294. Use your gun depression. Use your small turret that might even be able to sometimes catch a shell from a Revelarize and it won't penetrate the tank, to bait them out and then punish them. And the fact that you can do 1,280 damage within 6 seconds of the first shot in this vehicle is just absolutely voracious. Now, I have to admit, in retrospect, I think I was a little bit overconfident pushing through here, and that can kind of happen once you've done 1,280 damage so quickly, and I advance before I'm reloaded. I probably should have hung back a little bit here, but I was feeling very confident in a matchup like this, and I was hoping that I could get forwards and put one into him, and oh no, do I need to reload right now? Awkward, 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 possibly. What are we gonna do? Okay, there's an ELC even 90. Hopefully we're gonna be able to get this guy. Uh-oh. KV3 hits me in the side. Well, how about you take this? Oh, looks like I fired just a touch too early there, so I don't manage to get my first shell in. Oh dear, oh dear. Artillery does really hammer me there. Now I wanted to punish that KV3 who was out in the open, but luckily for me, my Tiger P uses my spotting on the ELC even 90 to shut him down and I believe set him on fire. So I'm going to admit that that was a bit of a misplay there by me. I probably shouldn't have sat on the ridgeline. I probably shouldn't have taken that damage from the artillery, but I really felt like fighting back. And I also feel in this tank that when I'm loaded, I am incredibly dangerous in a vehicle like this. But also, this is where this tank is immensely frustrating. If I was in another tank destroyer right now, I wouldn't have abysmal DPM and I would be here to go and clean up the KV3. So I guess it's swings and roundabouts really in a tank like this. You can't have the burst damage potential where you do 1,280 to the Revelarize within 6 seconds of the first shot, and also then reload very quickly afterwards to be able to deal with the KV3 again. This thing would become like the WT Alfie 100 of Tier 8. When we think about it, this vehicle is actually quite similar, just having kind of better gun depression, better camo rating. But it obviously doesn't have that 560 alpha damage clap that you would get from that tank. Way back in the day now. Gosh, miss the WT Alfie 100 when I think about it, but also, no I don't. What am I talking about? No I don't. That tank was so toxic for the game in every single way. It was absolutely horrific. So we blind fire a load of rounds against the Tiger P, and now we reload for, 38 seconds. Wonderful. Always communicate that to your team by pressing the F8 key. And you know what? I think this vehicle is going to become a favorite of mine because, you know me, I like to rabbit on, and especially when I'm streaming, I like to rabbit on as well. I'm going to be able to just fire off a mag and then pretty much just sit there and chill for 30 seconds, and quite often that is exactly what you're going to be doing because, oh dear, now I've been caught reloading by the the KV13 again. Hopefully my team is going to handle that situation because I want to just keep advancing. I want to still get myself into a position where hopefully we can do some good damage. And oh baby, where are those tank destroyers? They must have been running away from the E25 who's advancing along the south. I don't kind of manage to catch them, so I'm thinking about going for the SU-152. There he is. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Kind of rushed that one. Should have aimed just a little bit more. Second one manages to hit. I get over, try and spot the M40. Don't manage to find him. I try to clutch shot the GW Panther, but I missed that shot, but I don't miss the M12. So 2 out of 4. Definitely not great. In a tank like this, when you've only got 1,505 base DPM, which you can get up to about 1,600 if you've got vents, brothers in arms, and you've got the pudding and tea on this tank, still not great. If you're only hitting 2 out of your 4 shells, then your effective DPM is pretty much about 800. And you can see that you'd have to be continuously reloading for about 5 minutes in a game to be able to get up to that 3 or 4k damage mark. But the thing is that the games, more often than not, do last that long, unless you're getting absolutely rushed by the enemy team, and that's where this vehicle does feel incredibly painful. But just the burst damage potential that you have on a vehicle like this definitely makes up for it. And that is what's just feeling so special about the GSOR, and why I had some absolute cracking games in the short time that I've managed to play this vehicle. It's currently under NDA, so I wasn't able to play it on stream, but you'll know that I'm going to be playing it a lot on Thursday to put it through its paces. A lot like I did with the Basante today. I played the Basante C45 16 times and won 14 out of those 16 games. Yeah, that vehicle, it's definitely going up and up and up in my estimation the more that I learn about its intricate nature. But I digress. We're not talking about the other vehicle that was released today. We're talking about the GSOR 1008. So in this scenario, why take the risk? I don't need to. I either want the artillery to just go in towards the cap circle, and right now I'm trying to show you that there's a lovely wide gun arc on this tank. But there we go, SU-130PM. I'm not going to reload in this situation because I think the game is going to go, or it's going to be over before I reload. So we put one in on the move. We clutch shot. The SU-130, I can take a hit from him at least 50% of the time. I can definitely take a hit from the 53 TP unless something wild and wacky happens there. I'm going to slow down as I come over the ridge, clap the SU, put one into the 53, and finish him off as well. And just look at that tank. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that is the raw power of the GSOR 1008. So obviously, incredibly weak with regards to its damage per minute, in not the best armor, but my lord, the gun handling on this vehicle and the damage that you're able to do, this thing just feels absolutely wild. I think I've got one more thing I wanted to show you before we take a look at the post-game stats. So, what do you think happens when a Scorpion G sits out in front of a GSOR? 1, 2, 3... Oh dear goodness. Out with the old, in with the new, right boys and girls? So our first game on Glacier got us an ace tanker and a high caliber for 1,235. That won't be an ace tanker for long. I'd say in a couple of days you're probably going to need at least about 1,500 to be able to get an ace tanker in this vehicle. But no gold rounds fired means that we make 156,000 credits profit. Not too shabby. Next up on Moravanka, which I'd like to clarify was the very next game that we played in this vehicle. Another high caliber, 1,237 base experience, 3,883 damage, 3 kills, and another 150,000 credits profit. This thing, for me, as a lover of vehicles with good gun depression, ticks all the boxes. It has the firepower, it has the gun depression, and it has enough mobility to be able to get there to use it. This thing against tier 6 tanks feels absolutely disgusting. And if you play against tier 10 vehicles, if you dab the 2 key and load the gold, you're still going to probably break even as long as you're penetrating, and those 321 millimeters of APCR penetration rounds, no tier 10 tank wants to get hit by that. And considering how accurate, bursty, and flexible this vehicle is, I think the GSOR 1008 is probably one of my favorite tier 8 TDs in the game right now. And it's really interesting for me that Wargaming seem to be balancing these new vehicles so heavily around their damage per minute. And while the GSOR definitely suffers from that lower damage per minute, and as it's comparable to the Lorraine and the T77, doesn't really be holding back those two tanks. The Lorraine 40T has a 51% average win ratio on the European server, and the T77 Heavy, while it's by no means top, is at 50.86 average wins as well. Accordingly, if you want to be successful in the GSOR, you're going to have to do everything that you can to mitigate the disadvantage of this tank, and that is control the engagement. Make sure you avoid the all-in fights. Be ready to run away, possibly even turn your tank around and use the 8 degrees of gun depression that this vehicle has to work the ridge, and then bomb it away from your opponents to reload to be able to attack them as they're making the second advance. And if you can master that, then trust me, you are going to do wonders in what is now one of the most dangerous tanks to sit in front of at tier 8. So finally, if you're watching this tank review as it's released, and I guess for the first few months of its release, Wargaming are probably going to make the GSOR 1008 an exclusive inside their loot boxes, which are scheduled to be released tomorrow. And I have no confirmation if it's going to be available separately. My best guess is that we won't see this tank sold outside of loot boxes for about 3 to 6 months. And so if you want to get your hands on this tank, then deplorably, you are really going to have to gamble inside the loot boxes to be able to get it. And I've had runs where I've not got the tank that I wanted in 200 loot boxes, so be very careful. You could go and dump hundreds of dollars, hundreds of euros in loot boxes and have no guarantee you're going to get this vehicle. And so my firm recommendation is that if you don't absolutely utterly have all of the cash in the world and you must play this tank right now, and especially if you don't need the gold, you don't need the premium time, and you don't need any of that jazz, don't be pressured to get the GSOR. It will be available later on in 2021. So now for all of those other people out there who are maybe watching this tank review far in the future when this vehicle might be on public release, is it a good tank? Well, currently at the end of 2020, yes, I think this is probably one of the better turreted tank destroyers out there, and it is a great vehicle for those players who will be able to use all of its advantages. But I think it's quite a complicated one. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone. And I think unless you know what you're doing with the tank, I think this could be one of the most dangerous vehicles in the game in the hands of a strong player, but also one of the worst tanks in the game in the hands of a beginner. And if you're one of the players out there who have no interest in the GSOR 1008, but you want to know how to deal with them effectively on the battlefield, my top tip to you is that you have to take advantage of this vehicle during its weakest down period. Try and count its shells. Watch it fire 4 shells, and after it's fired the 4th, you better go after it, because you've got about 40 seconds to be able to hopefully cripple it or take it out altogether before it's going to be ready once again for its signature 1280 burst. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this tank review. If you did, give it a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments what you think about the GSOR 1008. Do you think that the damage per minute will completely hold it back, or do you think that all of the other statistics of this vehicle, which look pretty darn good, mean it's going to be a bit of a terror on the battlefield? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.